the world in light. I see the world in wonder. I see the world in light. Bursting in living color. I see the world in grace. I see the world in gospel. I see the world your way. And I'm walking in the light.
When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. But Lord, 'tis for thee, for thy coming we wait. The sky, not the grave, is our goal. Oh, trump of the angel, oh, voice of the Lord, blessed hope, blessed rest of my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. And Lord, haste the day when my face shall be sight. The clouds be rolled back as a scroll. The trumpet shall sound, and the Lord shall descend. Even so, it is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul. With my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul. With my soul. It is well. It is well with
should know, who speaks from his inspired.
Good morning. We got Chuck. I didn't know Chuck could read. Oh, man. Has everyone had a good weekend so far?
Yes.
We hung out at the fair here, the Georgia National Fair yesterday for a few hours. I'm a little sore. We were talking that the older I get every year, so we go every year, and we were talking, it seems like every year I get a little, like my feet and my back start hurting a little earlier. Yeah. So, but all right. Yeah, let's get started with a word of prayer, and then we will finish into the death and resurrection of Jesus. Dear God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the many blessings you give us, and we thank you for the freedom and the opportunity we have to come and worship you, to spend time in your word, and to learn more about you, Lord. I ask that you be with us as we go through your trial, your arrest, your next week we'll look at your crucifixion, Lord, and just help us to understand the meaning behind all this and what this truly meant for us. And it's in Christ we pray. Amen. So one of the things I was thinking about as I was going through this, putting this together this week and then reviewing it this morning, is if you look at all the Gospels, there's like, Ralph's got them in the back. There's, chapter after chapter after chapter, like, 8/10 of the Gospels is about Jesus' life, and Jesus' death is about 2 chapters. And I was thinking about that, and it's like, well, it's not because, his death's not important, because it is important, because if it wasn't for his death, then we be pointless to be here. But I was thinking about it, and I think one of the main things is because I think one of the main reasons it's so much, that it covers so much of Jesus' life for us, is because that's the example of how we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to live. And so they put so much of that in there, and then there's a little bit about his death and resurrection. And so I don't know, that was Chad's thinking through that. But anyways, we're going to look at Jesus agonizing in the garden, and like I put all the verses that kind of correlate with this since we're going through it in chronological order. I'm going to read out of Luke for this one, only because Luke's the only one who mentions Jesus' sweating blood, and so we'll look at that. But Luke 22, verses 39 through 46. Then, accompanied by the disciples, Jesus left the upstairs room and went out as usual to the Mount of Olives. There he told them, "Pray that you will not be given into temptation." He says this to them twice, and I got some notes on this in here. He walked away about a stone's throw and knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, please take this cup of suffering away from me, yet I want your will to be done, not mine." Then an angel from heaven appeared and strengthened him. He prayed more fervently, and he was in such agony of spirit that his sweat fell to the ground like great drops of blood. At last he stood up again and returned to the disciples, only to find them asleep, exhausted from grief. "Why are you sleeping?" he asked them. "Get up and pray so that you will not be given in to temptation." Now, Matthew and Mark's account's a little bit different. There's a little bit more of a back and forth, but I wanted to put Luke's in here because, like I said last week, one of the things I'm trying to do as we go through this, I think most of us in here have read this or been through this account probably 20, 30, 40, 50, who knows how many times, and so what I wanted to try to focus on were the things that kind of stood out a little bit. And so one of the things here is a lot of people would question, I've heard the question asked, well, Jesus is questioning God, in a sense questioning himself, I guess, and was this sinful for him to or rebellious for him to not want to actually go to the cross? And so the answer to that is obviously no, because Jesus knew what was coming up. Jesus understood the agony that he was going through. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think, not that he wasn't, the pain was going to be unbearable. There was going to be a lot of pain. I think the thing that he was suffering about the most, or agonizing over the most, was the fact that he knew he was going to be separated from God. I think personally he could take the pain, right? He could have dealt with the other stuff. It was the fact that he was going to be separated from God himself. And so we see here, the cup that he refers to was the agony of the alienation from God. And he understood what that was going to be like. So not only was he going to take on the sins of the world, all the sins of the world on himself, but he was also going to be separated from God. And so that the anxiety, the stress from that literally caused him to sweat drops of blood. And that is the thing. I didn't go back and look at it, but I looked at it before. But there is a condition where you can stress so bad, become so stressed that you can actually cause the blood vessels around your sweat glands to actually burst, and it mix with your sweat, and it looked like, and it appeared to be, or actually will be, blood inside your sweat. So that's how stressed he was about this. Jesus asked the disciples here to pray that they would not fall into temptation. The biggest thing here is Jesus knew what was about to happen. And he knew what his disciples or his apostles were going to go through. And so he's telling them, look, you need to pray that you don't fall into temptation because of what, he didn't say what was going to happen. And so it happens twice here, and we see that they keep falling asleep. In the other accounts, we know they keep falling asleep, because they're exhausted. They're exhausted because they've been going at it for a while now. But they couldn't even stay up. And like I said earlier, only Luke tells us that about the agonizing drops of blood. Only Luke is the only one who mentions that. I believe, and we'll see this here in a minute too, I think the reason Luke is the one who it is because Luke's a doctor. And so I think I think that's probably the reason why Luke put that in there, was because he understood what that was, being a doctor. So Jesus' praise, not thy will be done, but or not my will, but your will be done. He did not want to do this. I mean, Jesus did not want to do this. If there's any other way, please let it pass. But in the end, he knew this was the only way, and so he went forward. So then he goes in, and he's betrayed. This is when Judas comes in. And so I'm going to read here Matthew's account, chapter 26, 47 through 56. And even as Jesus said this, Judas, one of the 12 disciples, arrived with a crowd of men armed with swords and clubs. They had been sent by the leading priests and elders of the people. The traitor Judas had given them a prearranged signal. You will know which one to arrest when I greet him with a kiss. So Judas came straight to Jesus. Greetings, Rabbi, he exclaimed, and gave him the kiss. Jesus said, since this is interesting, what Jesus said, my friend. He still, even though he knew what he was going to do, he still called him my friend. Go ahead and do what you have come for. Then the others grabbed Jesus and arrested him. But one of the men with Jesus, I like how Matthew and John later on will see this. They'll say one of the men, others actually called him out, but John writes about himself and says one of the men as well. With Jesus pulled out his sword and struck the high priest's slave, slashing off his ears. Put away your sword, Jesus said. Those who use the sword will die by the sword. Don't you realize that I could ask my Father for thousands of angels to protect us, and he would send them instantly? But if I did, how would the scriptures be fulfilled that describe what must happen now? Then Jesus said to the crowd, am I some dangerous revolutionary that you come with swords and clubs to arrest me? Why didn't you arrest me in the temple? I was there teaching each day. But this is all happening to fulfill the words of the prophets, as recorded in the scriptures. At that point, all the disciples deserted him and fled. So Judas shows up with a whole, with a kind of a garrison of people here. But it's interesting. So the man that says one of his disciples cut off the man, we know that's Peter. We get that from John 18:10. Peter was trying to, Peter had said before he wasn't going to deny Jesus. He was going to stand there to defend Jesus. And he at that point was backing up his stance. He pulled a sword out and chopped this guy's ear off. And we know, I think in John's account, John mentions that Jesus actually heals the man's ear, which is interesting. If I'm going to arrest someone, and that guy, and one of their people cut my ear off, and the person I'm arresting heals it, it would be hard for me to continue arresting that guy. It's like, oh, I've got to back out. Sorry, guys. But anyways, so we see this, Peter being Peter. Peter is a mess. The whole, from the time we see Peter all the way through the end, up until Acts, Peter's just an absolute mess, and I think we can all relate with Peter. And so the other thing too, and Jesus kind of calls them out on this, although they could have arrested Jesus at any time, that came at night because they were afraid of the crowds. And plus, usually when you're trying to do something wrong, right, or something illegal, when do you usually do it? At night, right, under the cover of darkness. And this is what they were, huh? Yeah, as a secret, they're trying to hide it. And so what's funny here too, maybe not funny, I guess in a way it's sad. A few hours earlier, this band of men said they would rather die than desert their Lord. They see him arrested, and every single one of them takes off. Every single one of them. And that's interesting because these men had been with him for 3 years now, a little over 3 years, and one single arrest, and they all scatter and desert. And it's because they still didn't understand the kingdom. This is my opinion, Chad's opinion, is they still didn't understand the kingdom. They thought Jesus was going to come with this army and really rise up and defeat everyone, and they see him just kind of handing himself over. He's not even resisting. He's just letting them take him. And so I think that was part of it. Judas brought a contingent of police and soldiers in order to get him from the religious court. They had the religious leaders at that time. Again, Roma had let them have a little bit of leeway in what they were allowed to do, prosecute things. We'll learn a little bit more about that here in a minute. And then we see the traditional kiss. A kiss was and is still, if you see Jewish men, that is a traditional, they will kiss each other as a greeting on the cheeks. It's still a greeting among men in certain parts of the world. In this case, it was also agreed upon signal to point out Jesus. I put here, it's ironic that a gesture of greeting would be the means of betrayal. So I mean, that's a gesture of friendship, a gesture of companionship, and you're using it to betray people. So they take, any comments, questions before I move on? So they take Jesus to Ananias, and we'll see this, and this is only in John 18, 12 through 24. So the soldiers there, their commanding officer and the temple guards arrest Jesus and tied him up. First, they took him to Ananias, and we'll see this. Since he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, I think is how you say that, the high priest at the time. Caiaphas was the one who told the other Jewish leaders, "It is better that one man should die for the people." Simon Peter followed Jesus, as did another of the disciples. Most scholars believe that another of the disciples was actually John himself who was writing this. That other disciple was acquainted with the high priest, so he was allowed to enter the high priest's courtyard with Jesus. And one of the reasons they believe this, and I believe this too, that it was John, is because he goes into a little bit more detail into some of the conversations that happened, as if he was actually there and heard them. So I think that's why I would agree with that statement. Peter had to stay outside the gate. Then the disciple who knew the high priest spoke to the woman watching at the gate, and she let Peter in. The woman asked, "You're not one of the man's disciples, are you?" "No," he said, "I'm not." Now, this is the first time that he denied knowing Christ. We're actually going to go back through it and kind of see another account of this, but John actually records the first time that he says, I don't know who this man is. Because it was cold, the household servants and the guards had made a charcoal fire. They stood around it, warming themselves, and Peter stood with them, warming himself. Inside, the high priest began asking Jesus about his followers and what he had been teaching them. Jesus replied, "Everyone knows what I teach. I have preached regularly in the synagogue and the temple where the people gather. I have not spoken in secret." Y'all know everything that I've been speaking. You've been there the whole time. "Why are you asking me this question?" asked those who heard him. "They know what I said." Then one of the temple guards standing by slapped Jesus across the face. "Is this the way to answer the high priest?" I would not want to be that man. And Jesus replied, "If I said anything wrong, you must prove it. But if I am speaking the truth, why are you beating me?" Then Ananias bound Jesus and sent him to Caiaphas, the high priest. So, Caiaphas, thank you. So here, Jesus was taken to the high priest's residence. So the high priest's residence was like a temple court, almost like it had housing, and then it had a courtyards around it. And so that's how, and it more likely would have been more than one house in this area, because, and as we'll see here, the two were both high priests. The Jewish way this was done was once you were a high priest, you were the high priest that's for a lifetime, kind of like our Supreme Court appointments. But the Roman government, for whatever, stepped in and took Ananias away and put Caiaphas up as the high priest. And so the Jewish people saw it as having two high priests. That's why they took him to Ananias first, but he had to go to Caiaphas for the official ruling and official judgment. And so that's why that was done there. And we'll see that next here. Like I said, the other apostle here, or the other disciple, was probably John. He would have knew he kind of had a relationship, must have had a relationship with them, and so that's why they were allowed them in. So because of that connection, John then got Peter in. Peter was able to come into the courtyard as well. And like I said, we see Peter's first denying Christ there as we go through that. So that's kind of the rollout there of how that works. And then, like I said, I was trying to think if there's anything inside that. The way they do. The one note here is both Caiaphas and Ananias cared more about their political ambitions than their responsibility to lead the people of God. Like, they knew what they were doing, but they cared more about their power and their authority than they actually did about, making sure that that this innocent man was not actually killed. They were going for blood. They were going to kill him, and so that's what they make up this mock trial and arrest him at night and do all these things under the cover of darkness in order to try to speed this through. And get this done. Any comments, questions through that? All right, so Caiaphas questions Jesus. And this is actually recorded in Matthew, Mark, and 2 sections of Luke. But I'm going to read from Matthew. Verses 57, then the people who had arrested Jesus led him to the home of Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers and religious laws and the elders had gathered. So they were already there waiting for him to get there. Meanwhile, Peter followed him at a distance. So Peter is continuing to follow at a distance through this courtyard from home to home, watching to see what happened. He went in and sat with the guards and waited to see how it would all end. Inside, the leading priests and the entire high council were trying to find witnesses who would lie about Jesus so they could put him to death. But even though they found many who agreed to give false witnesses, they could not use anyone's testimony. So they had all these, I'll do it, but none of their false testimony was good enough to be able to actually kill Jesus with. So finally, 2 men come forward who declared, this man said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. What did Jesus actually say? Do y'all remember? Jesus said, if you destroy this temple, then I could rebuild it in 3 days. It was something along, I forget the exact, did I put that in my notes? I didn't. Yep. But he told them, and he was talking about himself, that if you tear this body down or tear me down, then I will raise it in 3 days. And so what they did is they took and twisted the words that he said and said he's going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, which would have been, they worshiped the temple, and so it was blasphemous, hugely blasphemous. So then the high priest stood and said to Jesus, well, aren't you going to answer these charges? What do you have to say for yourself? But Jesus remained silent. Then the high priest said to him, I demand in the name of the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. Jesus replied, you have said it, and in the future, and this is what I like, he never says this is who I am, like he just, in Jesus' way. You have said it, and in the future you will see the Son of Man seated in the place of power at God's right hand and coming on the clouds of heaven. So basically, in a way, he's like, look, you said it, and you're going to see me come one day, and it's going to be something else. Then the high priest, of course, tore his clothing to show his horror and said, blasphemy, why do you need other witnesses? You have all heard his blasphemy. What is your verdict? Guilty, they shouted. He deserves to die. Then they began to spit in Jesus' face and beat him with their fists, and some slapped him, jeering, prophesy to us, you Messiah, who hit you that time? I wonder what happened. Like, I know the Bible doesn't say, but I wonder what happened to these people that slapped Jesus and beat him and punched him and spit on him. I just couldn't imagine, especially after everything that happens, that we were to be in those people and thinking, oh, what did I do? And so anyways, so because of their haste, the elders, the high priest, all were at his house. They were ready. The Sabbath was less than 24 hours away, so they were trying to get all this done before the Sabbath. The religious leader met in his house at night instead of waiting until daylight. Usually they would wait till daylight of the day. Again, they're still doing this in the cover announcements. The High Council was the most powerful religious political body of the Jewish people. Although the Romans controlled Israel, like I said, they allowed them to basically take care of their own laws and their rules and punishments and stuff like that. But a death sentence had to be approved by the Roman government or Pilate. And so that's why, that rule hadn't been done, they would have gone ahead and crucified him or killed him right then. They probably would have just stoned him to death. And so this is probably part of the reason, the crucifixion had to happen. And so because that's what it's talked about. So we'll see that. And again, we see the high priest trying to use witnesses who no good. And finally, two people come forward and lie, again, about what he actually said and twist his words. And so then Jesus goes on to declare who he is in no uncertain terms. Well, look, you're going to see me sitting on the right hand of God. And that's the sitting on the right hand of someone is the most powerful position you can have besides the actual position itself. And so he was claiming that, this is exactly who I am. And it's interesting in this whole time, Jesus, you see him as he goes through this whole thing. He never looked upset from the description, and he was never upset. He was never just kind of freaking out or overly, or he stayed calm, cooled, and collected the entire time. I can tell you what, if someone was slapping me in the face and beating me, I would not be staying calm and just sitting there. But Jesus did. Jesus just sat there. All right, so then we get to Peter. So Caiaphas does this. They're going to take him to Pilate. Well, we're not quite there yet. But then we skip into Peter. So while this is going on, Peter denies Jesus 3 times. So he's already denied him once, but in Matthew's account, he sums up all of them right in order, like they happen. But they didn't really happen one right after the other real quick. There was a little bit of a time in between each one. But we see this in Matthew 26, verses 69 through 75. Meanwhile, Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard. A servant girl came over and said to him, "You were one of those with Jesus, the Galilean." But Peter denied it in front of everyone. "I do not know what you are talking about," he said. So this would have been the first one that John recorded after that John recorded after John had gotten Peter into the courtyard. Later, out by the gate, another servant girl noticed him and said to those standing around him, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." Again, Peter denied it, this time with an oath. "I do not even know the man," he said. A little later, some of the other bystanders came over to Peter and said, "You must be one of them. We can tell by your Galilean accent." Peter swore, "A curse on me if I am lying. I do not know the man." And immediately the rooster crowed. Suddenly Jesus' words flashed through Peter's mind. "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. That you were denied 3 times that you even know me." And he went away weeping bitterly. I could not, of all the things that we see Peter's just constantly through the Gospels is a mess, right? He's always, Jesus calls him Satan at one point because, he's trying to keep things from happening that Jesus is trying to have, happen, especially around the death. And he's always just putting his foot in his mouth. And I like Peter, and I've said this as we've gone through this whole thing, because I relate with Peter. I relate with Peter a lot, and I think a lot of us as humans do, because there's so many times where we're ambitious, we're whatever we are, and we put our foot in our mouth, we overstep, we get in the way, we think we're doing the best thing, and we're actually messing things up. And so Peter, even though he had goodwill and good intentions, a lot of times was just absolutely a mess. And that's us as humans. We are an absolute mess sometimes. And so Peter, in his passion and his stuff, told Jesus, he was going to stand with him the whole time. He would never desert him. And Jesus is like, "No, you're going to deny me 3 times. Before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times." And Peter's like, "No, I won't." You're arguing with the man who's always been right the entire time you've been with him. But so we see this as he goes through, and I cannot imagine. Peter, if you look at this, so in this last one, people will say Peter swore. He didn't say cuss words like we would talk about today. He didn't, say the F word or do something like that. This type of swearing was basically and I like the way the New Living Translation says it, basically a curse on me if I lie. Basically, he's saying here, may God strike me dead if I'm lying. And that's you're denying Jesus. That's kind of a crazy thing to say when you're denying God himself for the 3rd time. But he was scared. And I want to say, we can condemn Peter. We can call Peter out for this. But I guarantee you that almost I would probably say every single one in this room would have probably done the same thing. You have these, all these police, these soldiers coming to arrest Jesus. You know that he's probably going to be killed. You're fearful for your life, right? And so he's curious. He's wanting to try to stay close to Jesus. You can see that, that human nature, I think, side of that. He's wanting to see what's going to happen to Jesus. Maybe he's thinking maybe there's a way I can help. I don't know. But then he keeps getting called out while he's around Jesus. And he's like, no, I don't know this man. I don't know him. And then finally at the last, he basically, swore in the Bible. You know how we swear in our mother's grave sometimes? It's like, I swear on this that I don't know who he is. And then the rooster crowed, and he realized what he did. And he went away weeping bitterly because of what he did. And so there's going to be an interesting exchange that was this. I think this right here was the turning point in Peter's life that really changed his life so much. This and then his interaction with Jesus after the resurrection, which we'll look at in a couple weeks. But I put in here, Peter's experience in the next few hours would change his life. He would change from a half-hearted follower to a repentant disciple. And finally, one of the things we see is, Peter's the one who gives a sermon at Pentecost, right? The great speech, I guess, or sermon you want to call it, where thousands of people were converted to Christ that day. And so it's interesting that he goes from, obviously the Holy Spirit plays a huge role in this, and we'll see this as well. But he goes from being this scared man who runs away to someone who's willing to stand in the face of the government and preach Jesus all that day long, whether they're going to threaten to kill him or not. And so this is why I love Peter, because while we can identify with this and know that, hey, you know what, I'd probably be Peter as well, there's another side of Peter we'll see. Well, we won't see because we won't get that far in class, but we'll see if you read through Acts and get through Acts 2 that Peter becomes a completely different person, and with the power of the Holy Spirit, we can become that same person as well. And so that's the wonderful thing about Peter in that whole thing. Any comments, questions, anything around this, Steve? Yeah.
19 through 21.
Okay. That was early on it.
Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up, but he was speaking of the temple of his body.
Yes. Yeah.
That's where it was.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think that that'd beat me to death. I believe that'd beat me to death. I mean, because, but now Christ don't appreciate violence either.
No.
And I have a tendency of violence. So see, he probably wouldn't have had me hanging out with him anyway.
Well, and that's one of the things. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I think about that, and I meant to write some comments on it. I forgot to about live by the sword, die by the sword.
Yes, sir.
And there's been there's people who have misinterpreted that, and I think in some ways, literally what Jesus is saying. But look, if you're going to be violent, you're going to die by violence. If you live a violent life, you're going to die a violent life. We see that constantly, right?
Well, look what he did with Peter when
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
probably telling me, ho, Zane, ho.
And in human nature, this is Chad's human nature too. If you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you 10 times. If you hit me, and I can tell you that in high school, there was times, I'll give you an example. One time, it didn't actually hurt me. Some kid or some guy, my brother was playing around. I got time, I think, for this story. My brother was playing around, accidentally hit a guy in the head with a basketball. My brother, he grabbed my brother, started choking him. And I basically was like, let him go. And he wouldn't let him go. Finally, he let him go. Nathan passed out. His head hit the basketball gym floor. I don't remember anything that happened after that. The only thing I remember is finally the center for the football team ran up, wrapped his arms around me, held me down, and just grabbed me while I was kicking and trying to punch him and everything. Finally, once they got me calmed down, I look over. This man is bleeding from his eyes. I had hit him so many times. I don't remember it. And so that's the human nature side of things. You hurt me, I'm going to hurt you. And so as a Christian, that's not the way we're supposed to live. Right? Someone hits you in the face, You give them the other side of your face to hit. I can't do that yet. I'm not there. I've gotten better about things. I've learned how to, control things like that. But I was a teenager then. But those are that's human nature. But Jesus sat there and just let people beat him. And we're going to say they put a crown of thorn on his head eventually and slap him and hit him with rods and all that kind of stuff. And he just sits there and lets it happen. And I said I don't think there's a person in this room who would sit there and let something happen. Go ahead.
I was going to say one thing. He wouldn't let David build the temple.
Yeah.
He said, you had too much love. Not that he didn't love David. He loved David with all his heart. Thought he was just one, David had problems. But he wouldn't let him build the temple because of the blood he had on his hands.
Yeah.
It's that important to God that men aren't to be that way.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. He probably never selected me to be, with his group. But anyway, I have. I'm like you in a club. If I was with a buddy and I saw him surrounded, he's in the middle of them running his mouth. I was dumb enough to go over there and put my chest in their back.
I've been there. I've done that too. Stupid. It's stupid. You're dumb when we're dumb when we're young, man. We do stupid things. Yep. Yeah, ego and all pride and all that. But you think about that and oh man, I had a thought and I lost it. Maybe it'll come back to me. But yeah, I mean, it's. Oh no, human nature is a lot of this is part of the reason I think Jesus likes this, because human nature, if someone does you wrong or someone's violent to you, it's like, oh yeah, well if you retaliate, well they deserve that. But just think how much more of an impact it makes when someone does something to you like that, and you're like, you know what, I'm not going to do anything about it. I forgive them, and you walk away. And so,
That was exactly what I was about to say. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just walk away.
Yep.
Part your ways with it.
yep. And that makes you do that, and someone's like, man, that's a different person right there. He could have retaliated, or she could have retaliated. No, he just walked away and said, I forgive you. And I mean that's going to have a bigger impact than if you beat the mess out of someone or do something like that. So get revenge. All right, so we get into now the council, religious leaders condemned Jesus. Again, this one I went to Luke. The other ones were just Matthew and Mark's, just like a sentence. So I went with Luke on this one because he goes into a little bit more detail. At daybreak, all the elders of the people assembled, including the leading priests and the teachers of religious law. Jesus was led before the high council, and they said, "Tell us, are you the Messiah?" But he replied, "I tell you, you won't believe me. If I tell you, you won't believe me. And I ask you a question, you won't answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated in the place of power at God's right hand." So he's telling it to him again. They all shouted, "So you are claiming to be the Son of God?" And he replied, "You say that I am." Now that sentence, that I am, is very important. We'll look at that. Why do we need other witnesses, they said? We ourselves heard him say it. So they're like, we heard him say it. It's blasphemous. And so the reason they did it, so they're arresting Jesus on theological grounds, right? They're on religious grounds. He didn't actually commit any actual punishable crimes like by the Roman law or what societal laws would have. This was based solely on theological grounds, because they knew anything beyond that they knew here, and blasphemy was going to be thrown out if they went to the Roman court. If they go to Rome and say, "Hey, this guy blasphemed our God," they're going to be like, "Well, we don't really care. Go away." That didn't affect. So now they're trying to twist him into being a rebellious leader who's going to overthrow the Roman government. And that's when Rome will get involved, because anything like that, Rome was going to squash really quick. And so Jesus did that. So you're going to see here, we don't see it here, I got it in the notes, it's in Matthew or Mark, I think. They say, it says that they sent him to Pilate. And so that's the reason they sent him to Pilate, is because Pilate is the only person who can say or give him a death sentence. They wanted to kill him, but under their law, the only person who could hand out a death sentence in that time was the Roman government, so it would have been Pilate. So as they go through all this, again, it doesn't say that they sent him. I think both Matthew and Mark both say that. I can't remember. But then they say they sent him on to Pilate. And so, but in this discussion, Jesus doesn't come out and say, "Yes, I am the Son of God." But when they asked him, he said there, "You say that I am. Anyone know what that reference is back to? Huh.
I'm in New American Standard. He replies back, and he said to them, "Yes, I am."
I'll have to go back and look.
You say I am.
Yeah, that one's, I have to go back and look at, let me look that up and see which version, because usually the New American Standard is more accurate to the Greek. And so,
Okay, 'cause I'm just like,
with word by word. So let me go back and say, does anyone have any version besides the New?
in the notes it says, literally it says, "You say that I am."
Okay. All right.
Literally.
Yeah, so literally, yeah.
Right, there you go.
Yeah. And so using that I am, that comes from Exodus, right? Where God said, tell them what? I am. And so they understood what he was saying when he said, you say that I am. And so he was, yeah, that's who I am. I am God. And so again, that's when they just lose it, right? Again, so now we got to get him to Pilate, because we got to get Pilate to kill him. But the only way we're going to get Pilate to kill him is if they think he's going to be a rebellion, start a rebellion, or overtake the throne. We'll see that. All right. And then we kind of take a break from the trials, and we see that Judas goes and hangs himself. And this is recorded in Matthew, only in Matthew 27, 3 through 10. When Judas, who had betrayed him, realized that Jesus had been condemned to die, he was filled with remorse. So here's the thing. You know, I said a couple weeks back, I don't remember if it was last week or the week before, that a lot of the things with Judas, some scholars believe that Judas betrayed Jesus not because he was being evil and wanted Jesus to die, but that he actually wanted to kickstart the rebellion that he thought Jesus had come to do. And so, again, that's not recorded. We don't know that. But it's an interesting thought. I thought it was an interesting thought because you know, a lot of them thought that he was going to come and start this rebellion, and he didn't see the rebellion. So he thought maybe if he did this, it would kickstart the rebellion, and Jesus would do that. But then he sees that, well, the rebellion's not going to happen, and so I don't know. Again, that's not recorded. That's not a biblical thing, but I think it's a decent theory, anyways, of why he was filled with remorse for this. Because if he just wanted to betray Jesus for the money and betray Jesus, I don't know if he would have felt that much remorse for it. But anyways, so he took the 30 pieces of silver back to the leading priests and the elders. He says, I have sinned, he declared, for I have betrayed an innocent man. Why do we care? They retorted. That's your problem. So we'll look at this in a minute because anyway, we'll look at that. Then Judas threw the silver coins down in the temple and went out and hanged himself. The leading priests picked up the coins. It wouldn't be right to put this money in the temple treasury, they said, since it was payment for murder. They know what it was payment for. You know, they're not denying that. After some discussion, they finally decided to buy the potter's field, and they made it into a cemetery for foreigners. This is why the field is still called the field of blood. This fulfilled the prophecy of Jeremiah that says, they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price at which he was valued by the people of Israel, and purchased the potter's field as the Lord directed. So this is interesting. Judas went to go back to the religious leaders to say, look, I made a mistake. This guy's innocent. And they're like, we don't care. That's your problem, not ours. Now, that was totally opposite of what they were supposed to be there for. You know, that would be like, you know, our minister or going to our elders and being like, hey, I messed up. You know, I need some help. And then them being like, oh, that's your problem. Sorry. Deal with it. You know, and Steve.
This goes to show you how far these guys have gone down the rabbit hole.
Oh, yeah.
When you think about it, these guys are the leaders of the people and the priests and the religious people today. And to do these things was just totally against everything they were supposed to be.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
I mean, and they even admit that, you know, or one, we don't care, that's your problem. You know, you messed up, sorry. And then it's like, oh, we can't put this 30 pieces of silver in because it was used for murder. They're like, oh, it was used. That we gave you, right? And so they go out and buy a field for it. But it's just, It's crazy. So we see Judas here, man. He is filled with such grief that he actually goes out and hangs himself. And so, I don't know. The Bible doesn't say what happens to Judas or where Judas ends up, where, all this stuff. I mean, I don't know. We can only assume, but we don't know.
It says that it would be better for Judas to have never been born.
Yeah.
So that's terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible stuff
Yep.
here. And,
Yep.
it's scary.
It is scary.
You can get yourself in a position to where there's no return.
Yep.
Your dad is supposed to.
Yeah.
That you got to turn you over to yourself. That's scary stuff, man.
Yeah. God will turn you over to your mess, and you stay there.
You kind of have a little bit of you wish that it could be for Judas a little bit.
Well, yeah, you hope, but
But that's not what he's saying there in the Word.
no.
That's scary stuff.
Yeah, I mean, he does say that it would have been better for Judas never been born. And so, assumption there, it doesn't say, but my assumption is Judas probably ended up in hell. I mean, I don't see any other case, but God can do what God can do if he wanted to. But anyways, that's what it looks like. I put a note in here because there's some people who will use this as a counter of like, the Bible contradicts itself. Here it says he hung himself. The other one says he split open in Acts. I think it's 1:18. He spread out. He opened up and spread all over the field. And what it is that most scholars honestly believe, and I think this is very accurate, is that he hung himself. No one's going to touch that body, especially around Passover and everything. They let it stay there. And he finally, y'all know what happens to a body after it's been hanging for a couple of days, then it spewed over into the field. So I just wanted to put that in there because some people will try to use that. Oh, look, the Bible contradicts itself. No, it's just a continuation of what happened. And then finally, the prophecy that they talk about, or that John or Matthew writes about in here. He says the prophecy fulfilled that Jeremiah wrote. Well, the actual prophecy is actually found in Zechariah. But they believe the reason he wrote that Jeremiah is because Jeremiah was known for collecting of some of the prophets' writings and prophecies. So that's why they probably used Jeremiah there, even though it was actual prophecy that come from Zechariah. And you can actually see where it was taken from Jeremiah, and I got them in the notes there if you want to kind of look that up. And so that's why they probably said Jeremiah by name instead of Zechariah by name. So again, some people will try to twist things to say, hey, the Bible, was wrong here, or this wasn't, so it's wrong. No, there's a reason why some of that stuff's there. And then finally, Jesus stands trial before Pilate. And this one I'm going to read Matthew 27. I'm actually going to read two here, Matthew and John, because they kind of give a little bit, John goes into a little bit more detail, but Matthew has some stuff in there that John didn't. So now Jesus was standing before Pilate, the Roman governor. Are you the king of the Jews? The governor asked him. And Jesus replied, you have said it. But when the leading priests and the elders made their accusations against him, Jesus remained silent. Don't you hear all these charges they are bringing against you? Pilate demanded. But Jesus made no response to any of the charges, much to the governor's surprise. And so then John goes into a little bit more detail. For whatever reason, John had a little bit more of the conversation here that happened. John 18, 28 through 37. Jesus' trial before Caiaphas ended in the early hours of the morning. Then he was taken to the headquarters of the Roman governor. His accusers didn't go inside because it would defile them, and they wouldn't be allowed to celebrate the Passover. However, somehow John got, Matthew didn't seem to have this conversation, but for whatever reason, John did. So Pilate, the governor, went out to them and asked, what is your charge against this man? We wouldn't have handed him over to you if he weren't a criminal, they retorted. Then take him away and judge him by your own law, Pilate told them. Only the Romans are permitted to execute someone, the Jewish leaders replied. This fulfilled Jesus' prediction about the way he would die. Then Pilate went back into his headquarters and called for Jesus to be brought to him. Are you the king of the Jews, he asked. Jesus replied, is this your own question, or do others tell you about me? So he was kind of, in a way, talking back about, is this coming? Are you actually asking this question, or did the Jews tell you this? Pilate says, am I a Jew? Your own people and their leading priests brought you to me for trial. Why? What have you done? Jesus answered, my kingdom is not, I love Jesus. Jesus never, I think, hardly ever directly answers a question. He always just goes into what he's about. My kingdom is not an earthly kingdom. If it were, my followers would fight to keep me from being handed over to the Jewish leaders. But my kingdom is not of this world. Pilate said, so you are a king. Jesus responded, you say I am a king. Actually, I was born and came into the world to testify to the truth. All who love the truth recognize that what I say is true. So, you see here that the standing before Pilate, the religious leaders accused Jesus of a different crime from the ones they accused. They got him for blasphemy, but now that he's going to Pilate, they want to kill him. And so they're trying to say he's a criminal, right? He's a criminal. And then he's claiming to be a king, which in that day, if you're claiming to be a king, then you must have a kingdom somewhere, or you're going to try to take over the kingdom that you're in. And so he's going around getting these followers saying he's a king. And Jesus even says, look, you don't understand what I'm even talking about. Yeah, I'm a king, but I'm the king of a spiritual kingdom, not an earthly kingdom. Jesus' silence fulfilled the words of the prophet Isaiah 53:7. Pilate was amazed that Jesus didn't try to defend himself. He recognized the obvious plot against Jesus and wanted to let him go, but Pilate was already under pressure from Rome to keep peace in his territory. The last thing he needed was a rebellion over this quiet and seemingly insignificant man. So we're going to see next week that Jesus is going to go before Herod. Herod's going to send him back to Pilate. Pilate's going to send him to be crucified. We're going to see the Roman soldiers mock Jesus. Jesus be led away. Jesus put on the cross. Jesus dies. And then Jesus laid in the tomb. So we will look at all that next week. Thank you.